Welcome to ENROUTE, the podcast of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. The First Responder Behavioral Health Institute is bringing together some of the most inspiring and dedicated change agents in the global public safety, psychotherapy, and educational communities. Each episode of ENROUTE seeks to bring together first responder change agents and clinicians dedicated to constructively disrupting the status quo by tackling the tough subjects like first responder suicide, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, leadership development, critical incident response, peer support teams, and what it means to be psychologically safe and healthy while working in an unsafe world. All units, please stand by. The ENROUTE podcast is about to begin. You can resume normal traffic on this channel after this transmission. Welcome to this episode of ENROUTE. I'm Joseph Brigandi. On this episode, we interview the multi-talented Dr. Olivia Johnson, the founder of the Blue Wall Institute. The Blue Wall Institute consults with first responder agencies on needs assessments for training and education programs, as well as furthering research on first responder suicide. Dr. Johnson is the mind behind the concept of the Fatal 10, which examines the most significant factors and perhaps predictive factors of suicidality, not only within the first responder community, within every community and social group. Her paradigm-shifting research is essential in helping us to change the ways we think about suicide more globally, as a community, and as a society. Her research cuts across professional disciplines of public safety, and it's equally relevant in public and private corporations and school systems. If your organization has experienced violence or suicide, or you're trying to be proactive and prevent these things from happening, you can benefit from the research and contribution to the body of knowledge Dr. Johnson and the Blue Wall Institute offers us. In this episode, she's going to explain why she believes the current understanding of suicide is dead wrong, and she's going to challenge us to dig deeper for a better understanding of this terrible phenomenon. Please join me in welcoming the dedicated and passionate, talented and controversial Dr. Olivia Johnson to this episode of ENROUTE. Dr. Olivia Johnson, welcome to this edition of ENROUTE. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to go ahead and introduce you to our audience and tell people about your institute and what you do. So for the folks in our first responder community who don't know your background and about your programs, give us a little bit of a history of what you do and maybe why you do it.
Sure. So I'm prior law enforcement and prior military, and I realized very quickly through some of my research that we had some issues going on that weren't quite being addressed. That being, the major one was suicide. And we realized that the way that we were kind of going about it was kind of trying to push that whole block of suicide is the issue, suicide is the issue. And we weren't getting the feedback that we were wanting, to say the least. So the more research we did, we actually started realizing that we had to approach this in a different way. So at the Blue Wall Institute, we not only conduct the research, but we take that research and we put it actively into how we train, what we take to agencies, and really how we do things moving forward. So we started looking at this as the idea that we really don't look at suicide anymore, though we keep data. We look at it as inoculation, meaning that we try to get ahead of the issues that we have. So we've kind of changed the paradigm, if you will, on the whole suicide outlook of things, to where we don't want to just keep counting numbers because we know there's a problem. We've got to do something about why we're getting into this position in the first place. So that's really where our change in our organization came about. It's about 2 years ago. We started looking at it quite differently than most places. So currently I just travel the country, I train, I do consulting work, and we conduct needs assessments for agencies around the country.
You know, I've looked at your research and benefited from it. Research is not something I do. Now, tell us a little bit about your research arm. You have your doctorate. and your team engages in research. So I'm very gifted in the clinical treatment suite at utilizing data effectively, collecting that data not so much. So tell us a little bit about that part of your agency.
Sure. So I've been looking at the issue of suicide for at least 15 years now. And I know there are some groups that collect data, and we kept thinking, well, what's being collected wasn't cutting it. We don't need a number. We need to know what's really going on in each of the cases. So back at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, I actually started what's called the National Law Enforcement Suicide Mortality Database. Now that's a mouthful, but what that is a database that I currently house, and I collect cases of completed suicide, non-fatal attempts, and murder suicides among our law enforcement and our corrections officer populations. And what's different and what's unique about this database, number one, it's the only database in the world currently that houses over 122 data points. So no one else is doing anything even close to this. And how we get those points is I apply for autopsy, toxicology reports, police reports. I go back a minimum of 1 year on social media, any type of platform social media wise that we can find. We go back on that platform and we look through pictures, we look through context, we look through, connections. And we try to really figure out what was going on within the last year of life, the last month of life, the last minutes of life, if anything was posted out there that would be helpful. And then we pull that all together. My clinical cohort, Dr. Jory Crossan, who works with me at the Blue Wall, we come together and we do a full psychological autopsy on every case. So currently we house probably near 1,200 completed cases of suicide. But even bigger than that, we are trying to understand better the why behind it. And I'll tell you the reason that that's so important is not just so that other people know exactly, the why, but to understand that the common theme today is to place blame in one area. And we've noticed it for quite some time now, which is the job. Just to literally say it's the job, it's nothing else, it's causing PTSD, it's the trauma, it's the stress. And there's no other indications here. No one's looking deeper at this than the job. And the truth is, the data has actually shown us that the job is not the leading issue. So because we know that now, we can change how we go out and we train, and we can change our inoculation process to the things that are major in these people's lives that need to be addressed initially, and then follow up with what's left of what we call the fatal 10, which came out of this data. So we're really trying to educate people on a different level that, we got to stop blaming one or two things here. It's a combination of things that seem to work together in someone's life, usually for the negative, that start to have a snowball effect. And we, a lot of times we can't share some of the personal things that we find in the data, some of the things that we collect in the paperwork. It's stuff that we don't want to share because it may not shed a positive light. But we also need to come to the realization that as people and first responders, we are no different than the communities that we serve, and we have the same issues. And I think the sooner we can understand that concept, the sooner that we can start having some empathy and understanding for our first responder populations who are struggling.
I appreciate what you're saying here, but I got to let you know when I first read it, I didn't. I became immediately activated and said, what's wrong with her? We have an epidemic. This is, she's flying in the face of what the Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance has said. And I've been talking to this in epidemic proportions. And then I had to sit with that. And as a good therapist, I take my own medicine, take a deep breath, take a step back. Why are you activated? Well, because I might be wrong. Okay, what is actually going on here? And the truth of it is, when we dig it, there is a suicide epidemic in the nation, but it is no more so or less so with police, fire, EMS than it is in the corporate world, or that it is in, other agencies. I mean, there definitely is a suicide issue in the nation, but is it the number one thing taking out our first responders?
And that's the key there. That's the key is it's not even an epidemic. When we look at 1 million law enforcement officers nationwide, and we say that we could even have 10,000 officers a year that take their life and die by suicide, and we still wouldn't have an epidemic, statistically speaking, that we really have to kind of step back from that, because again, when I started doing this, I was doing the same thing. It was the job, everything was the job, everything related back to the job. But I got to tell you, the more that I started hearing these stories, like one story I got was this young man who said, the stress of the job, the things that I've seen have caused me to drink. And I said, okay, that's common. What's the issue? He said, well, I've had a drinking problem for 20 years and I blame the job. And I'm like, well, that's the problem. We take no personal accountability or responsibility for our choices. And we try to explain that everything that you're doing is a choice. And whether we like it or not, we find ways to cope, and they're not always positive. And then sadly, those coping mechanisms will have negative consequences, and they can carry other things that come along. Like someone that uses alcohol as a way to cope may have when we see in the data is health issues, relationship problems, financial concerns. There are many other things that follow that. But you can't go back and say, well, because I drank and it was because of the stress of the job, because I didn't have better coping skills, I can blame the job for that. And then I can blame my agency. And that's what's happening, sadly. And there are even many large organizations that are supposed to be here to protect these people, and they're saying the same thing. And I'm like, this is not okay. That's like telling a child that, when you turn 18, that we've allowed you to not be parented for the last 18 years. And if you make a mistake, well, we're going to blame everything around you for why you're like this. And you have no consequences. But once you're an adult, you have consequences. And that's kind of what's catching up with us now, are the consequences to those choices.
Yeah. When I sat with your work and really reflected on it, I had to step away from that paradigm and go, wait a minute. We're maybe pushing the wrong message. And as I look at my work, and regrettably, with first responders, I have been on so many suicide scenes and a few homicide scenes. And as I really reflected on our work, when we bring a client in, we do a PTSD survey. We do an adverse childhood experiences survey. And every single one of my first responders in crisis, the scores on these reports are through the roof. So they did come into the profession indeed with unresolved childhood trauma, or 2 or 3 tours in Afghanistan or something, and never saw a therapist once. You got to love them, because they came from a troubled circumstance and situation, wanted to change the world. So I'm going to go ahead and be a firefighter, and I'm going to go ahead and be a police officer, so that I can somehow change the world. We will call that the hero complex, or the hero's journey if you're into Joseph Campbell's work, or Carl Jung's. It'll be expressed as archetypal psychology, that what drew you into this battle in the first place. But unfortunately, as I spent a lot of time working with them in the clinical suite, is helping them to understand what drew you into this, and the need to be the hero and the need to help out had so much to do with the early childhood experiences, trauma, abuse, neglect, that shaped this personality and caused you to want to go ahead and do this. Then you come into our profession. Then you're exposed to all of the challenging calls that we get. Then situations start to spin out of control, but there's a need to address that underlying archetype and that those early childhood experiences that helped shape and formed you into driving you towards this profession in the first place. Trauma survivors and trauma victims are comfortable in chaos. Is it any wonder they end up as emergency room nurses, or police officers or soldiers on the battlefield? So once we get them to understand that some of those drivers that brought you here were an external impulse to go ahead and fix the problem, but now that you're here, the reason you're here is that we need to do the internal work. Address those shadows, address those complexes, address the drug or alcohol addiction, address the family problems, and also address the fact that you're also in a high-stress job that may be something you can stay in for the rest of your life, and it may not. So transition out of that might be something that will have to be considered at a certain point in your therapy. But doing the individual work, and the thing that your institute is pointing out, the thing that your research is taking us to, is the reality and the truth that all of these things are here, and they're not being addressed at all. So that is a tremendous contribution to our research and our understanding of trauma and some of the drivers that affect our first responder community. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show so much and get an opportunity to talk with you about this. And then you went out and you came up with the Fatal 10. Tell us a little bit about that. When we interviewed Daniel Sundahl, he was all about you and wanted to make sure that we understood your research and the power of understanding the Fatal 10. How'd you come up with that, and what is it trying to tell us?
Sure. No, we love Daniel too. He's great. So out of our data, I started mining, just really looking for the key aspects, the themes, what was really coming out of this. And the factors that came out are what we call the Fatal 10. So they're these top 10 factors that were noted in a majority of our cases of completed suicide, non-fatal attempts, and our murder suicides that had these almost a hierarchy, if you will. So we started out with relational issues, right? And then substance use and addiction, stress and trauma, sleep problems, mental health, physical health. We looked at, firearms access, being under investigation there, and then there's kind of a catch-all, which was the, kind of other major life events. But they were noted in a majority of these cases, so much so that when I started ranking them, I realized very quickly that, we had some serious things going on here, but it wasn't like it was this necessarily this like moment where you went, oh, this is going to be a huge game changer, because this is kind of common sense stuff. On the surface, it looks very simplistic. Those are only given as factors, like when we do like a flyer, for people to understand where we're coming from. But when you dig down deep into each of those factors, it's much more difficult for people to understand, because each of those factors then kind of overlap, and they have little arms, if you will, that will go to the next factor. They kind of connect each other. So it's almost like I said, that snowball effect starts to come in very quickly. Someone that may have used alcohol as a coping mechanism, it may work for them, and it may be working for them right now because they haven't had any major life consequences. When we start losing relationships over that, we start increasing our stress or our mental health issues because of the drinking problem. Or let's say we go to the doctor and we get this major, we get a diagnosis of something that is seriously wrong with us, and we realize it is due to our drinking. We start to notice very quickly that those factors add up. And I mean, it was unreal when we saw the number of issues that we were having relationally. That was our leading one, followed by substance use. And when we actually took that Fatal 10, and we combined them all down, we came up with two things that we noted were very important that came out of this data. And it was the importance of relational purpose, right? So we call it conscientious relational purpose. And what that means is, when we looked at the data, we could see certain things were coming out, like there was misuse of drugs and alcohol. We have a whole separate database actually that tracks drug overdoses among these same populations, and that weren't ruled suicide. So we have the misuse of prescriptions. We have, the misuse of illegal narcotics. We have these things that, based on someone who is conscientious at their core, will follow a doctor's orders. They will be to work on time. They will do what they need to do. They have responsibilities and they follow those. We started noting in the data that those things weren't happening, even though we have someone who believes at their core, and their belief system tells them that they're following the rules, and they're supposed to have a purpose, and they're going to have values that are instilled in them. We started noticing these things were getting turned around. And when we looked at this relational purpose, it has really two key components here. So this Fatal 10 boiled down to two major things, which are your relationships and your purpose in life. If your relationships are struggling, and you're noticing that you're struggling at why you're here, what's really going on in your life, is this what you're meant to be doing? And you start to have these clashes in your life with what your purpose is. We really started noticing those two key components come together, and there was something bigger here that we needed to look into. And that Fatal 10 was just kind of the starting point for us, and it's really kind of guided us along into the research and to other things that we started noticing, where people start questioning, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Or, the society right now hates me as a cop, but yet I feel like I'm giving more than I need to, and they hate me right now. Like the pendulum swings back and forth quite a bit in law enforcement. You're either loved or you're hated. And when you're kind of in the middle, nothing's really going on. And I think we've gotten to a point with COVID and other things going on that there's really this questioning of, is this where I want to be? Is this where I want, need to be? Is this my purpose? Does my family accept it? We were on a documentary recently, Jason Harney and Deb Ortiz, and it's called "Is There Something Going On at Home?" And we talked to Scott Medlin and his wife Rachel, and we that same thing came up. Scott's purpose was to be an officer. He was in the military. He struggled with issues with PTSD. And eventually Rachel said, well, listen, this isn't cutting it. The financial component here is not working for us. The hours are not working for us. I'm a single parent. They had to reconsider those two major factors, where one of them had relational issues and one had the purpose they were struggling with. And had they not come together, that relationship may have not worked out. Right? So it was a key struggle between those two major issues in someone's life.
Interpersonal relationships, when I realize in my interview process with my clients, I'm looking for a few things. Certainly the substance abuse and relationship issues. My index of suspicion for suicidality goes up substantially and significantly. When I do critical incident debriefing and diffusings, I sit with them, and one of the things I tell them, and I've had tears break out in the room, is listen, we got to normalize going to see a therapist like it's going to the dentist, okay? But please, please don't let it be that you're showing up in my office because you got your divorce papers and you're finally ready to go ahead and listen and start to process your issues. And unfortunately, most people will often wait until it's too late. It's too late to get the help you needed on the job, or too late to get the help you needed to save that marriage. And now we've got to move into lessons moving forward. So interpersonal relationships. And then there's a third thing that I wanted to ask you about. The third major stressor that I see that affects them is poor leadership. We do a lot of teaching about organizational development. People don't understand it's a psychological discipline. It used to be called industrial psychology. Now it's called organizational development. You can get PhDs in this. Understanding your people, understanding how to be a good leader, an effective leader, and not be a toxic leader is an important thing. One of Daniel Sundall's most poignant images has to do with a fire chief who's pouring gasoline on a firefighter who's sitting down and holding a candle that says post-traumatic stress on the candle. And unfortunately, some of our leaders don't understand some of their tactics, or they came up through the system. They didn't get a master's in leadership development somewhere. And maybe they don't have an understanding of their effect on their population. Are you seeing that in some of your surveys and some of your experiences where leadership may have had a negative impact in the process?
Well, I'll be honest, when we pull the research, a lot of that isn't really talked about as far as the job goes and the struggles at the job. Even with poor leadership, I hear that now from some people because they may disagree with how things are going or that morale is low. And we kind of go through those issues. My background and my doctorate is actually in leadership management. But again, that falls back on that interpersonal relationship issues, because it means that, you're having a conflict here and we don't know how to resolve it. The majority of our research, though, does not point to issues on the job, meaning with administrators or with supervisors and leaders. That's not really where the majority of their stress is coming from. And even when we talk work, it may be for some people now because they're starting to struggle and they don't have that solid foundation in their agency, or there's things that are happening. But a lot of it comes back down to when they go home, do they have the support at home? I can't tell you how many times I get phone calls and I tell them immediately, my first response is, I'm not a clinician. Yes, Olivia, we know you're not a clinician, but I do confidential peer support and I will listen and refer out. And the first thing out of their mouths, usually when there's a relationship issue, is I was caught cheating. I was, sexting someone. I was doing something online and my significant other caught me. And I said, okay, what do you want from me? Well, I need to see a therapist now. I said, so you want to see a therapist now, for better terms, to kind of cover your own butt here. And they kind of sat there for a minute. I said, so explain to me how I come into play here. Why do you need to talk to me? Well, I guess I want to make it look like I'm trying. Well, you should have been trying before. So what happens is we take advantage, myself included, we take advantage of our relationships behind closed doors. We expect them to be there. We expect them to be solid. We think that it's going to be unconditional. There's not going to be any strings attached. And the truth is, we don't take care of our relationships like we need to. We don't nurture them. We don't take care of the people in our homes. And when things happen, and our relationships start to break apart, that's when we want them more than anything. We don't, like you said, don't come into my office when you have your divorce papers. You should be coming in now to take care of these issues before it turns into divorce or a breakdown in that relationship. We don't see it that way. We think we are perfectly fine until the wheels come off the car. We can drive it for 10 more miles before we even see a problem happening. And that's where we're failing. The inoculation paradigm is we get in front of that issue. We should know, with some certainty that we're going to have these issues in our agency. If you're having issues behind closed doors at home personally, you're going to have issues in the agency. And if you're having issues behind closed doors at home, what I would say would be this. We need to even be stronger in our agencies to give those people what they need and the support that they need, because they may not be getting it at home, or they may have not taken the time to invest in those relationships. And now it's coming out to where they don't have that support and they're really feeling like it's starting to catch up with them.
Well said. I have had many a person land on my doorstep in what I call the 11th hour. Now you want help. And then when we get to it, what you really articulated is you're not here for an authentic reason. You're here to cover your ass, get some documentation, and go ahead and check the boxes. And unfortunately, we're not doing that. So we stand up to that very clearly. And we're simply not going to participate in that, or I'll get someone who'll show up for 3 sessions, and on the 3rd session they're like, hey, here's my disability paperwork. Well, we let them know we're not doing that, and then I'll try to redirect them. Hey, have you considered that this might be highly manipulative behavior on your part, because you didn't come here for genuine treatment. You're coming here to manipulate me and manipulate the system. I would like you to attempt to manipulate your physician and your psychiatrist, because we're not filling this out. And a few times they've forced that issue, and they don't like what ends up in the paperwork, because I'll put right in there, this particular individual seems to be more interested in documentation than they are therapy. Documentation to support a disability claim, then they are actively engaging therapy, as they've only been here 3 times in 6 months.
You're perfectly right, though. I mean, I've seen cases where I've had officers who've had a death in the family. I had one case where this individual shared a story that his brother had taken his life, and he, by fault of not dealing with it appropriately, started drinking and was doing some criminal activity. This individual was also in law enforcement, but expected his agency to understand that that was how he was coping with it. And then when he got in trouble, to come to his aid. And I'm like, time out. See, we can't then, which is what happened, is he blamed the agency for not helping him and vilifying him and punitive, whatever that followed. And I said, but there's the problem with the mindset is you're taking no personal accountability for what you did, and you're trying to vilify an agency who didn't now, help you when they offered help and you didn't take it because you said you didn't need it. And they should come to your aid now when you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing. And that's where we're getting this literally us against them, where you have administrators against your line officers, and you want people to pick a side and choose. And we have to come to, what we need is a national coming together of people that says, listen, we need to look at this, and we need to say, listen, this problem is much bigger, but we can't resolve it in a couple posts on social media. We can't resolve it by doing a couple things here and there. This really takes a national effort for people to understand what needs to happen. And there's so many different behaviors and personalities and personality types, if you will, that we're really struggling to find that commonality where we can come together. It seems like we're fighting each other more than we're helping each other at this point.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you mentioned personalities. I'm heavy duty into depth psychology, the work of Carl Jung, and part of what came out of that is some of the Myers-Briggs type indicators. And some people love them, some people don't. But one of the things they're pointing out is we got 16. It came up with 16 different boxes, 16 different types of personalities. I'm obviously extremely extroverted, and I absolutely did poorly when I was doing my corporate consulting around engineers. And I sat there with that work and really thought about how I speak to them, and realized that they want it in 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm very much an idea guy and a creative, and if you would like to annoy an engineer, go ahead and start coming from that internal creative place. So when I learned how another person's personality might work, I was able to temper mine a little bit and go, wait a minute, okay, they're going to appreciate, come into this room organized, Joseph, come into this room with, these are the three things I'm hoping to accomplish today. What do you guys think? Oh, we love him. So they went from, I don't want to work with him. He's too out there to, why didn't we hire him before? Why haven't we been bringing him in? Then I can get more creative and more into some of the aspects of my own personality. But isn't this the truth in all leadership? First, we need to understand the other. Then we need to go ahead and help them to understand us. So yeah, personalities, period. And then there's a frictional rub there. Because, in an employee who is spiraling out of control, they're starting to become highly manipulative. The administrators have have a obligation to all of us to maintain a line, to be ethical, to hold the public accountable, but also to hold their own people accountable. And that's going to start to get uncomfortable to an officer who's starting to spin out of control psychologically. You've explained so much here today. Where are we going next? What's the future hold for this kind of research and implementation? Regrettably, I struggle to get my programs into agencies. They absolutely call after a suicide. I'll get a few debriefings out of them, and then I'll propose clinically directed peer support, or that we do a series of education. The corporations will let me do leadership development initiatives 10 times faster than a police, fire, or EMS agency, yet I was a member for 35 years. So how do we normalize this, and how do we push this ball forward, and what are your thoughts?
Well, you nailed it again. I used to get calls all the time, and it was after a suicide. I would go do a training. I would talk about what we needed to talk about. Please call me. I would hand out business cards, and it would be after a suicide. I would get a phone call because everybody turned you down initially. We don't need this. We don't need your research. We're good. Our agency is good. And then they would call with their tail between their legs, and they would say, we need your help. And I said, there's nothing I can do for you now. I'm like, what do you want me to do? I can't fix your problem. You didn't call me. We went through this. I explained to you what needs to happen. If you have issues, you need to call me. I had parents of sadly officers that took their life by suicide that would call me and say, they thought at first I was a clinician because they would find my business cards and their wallets. And they're like, were you seeing our child, or were you seeing this individual? I'm like, no, they went to a training of mine and they had a card in their wallet. And I finally said, enough's enough. You guys cannot make this a reactive issue every time it happens. You either get on board with the front end of this, of what I'm telling you, or you got to stop calling me because it doesn't work like this. And I kind of I had to make that, that boundary and say, listen, I have no problem coming into your agency, helping you any day of the week. But if you see these issues and you fail to call me, it's not going to help you. You can feel as bad as you want after the fact, but it changes nothing. We're not magicians here. We want to do what we can to help you. You're not always going to like the outcome or your things that you find out about your people, but it's about the relationships. And I think with that, we realize, for me, I love my law enforcement. I love my military. I love my first responders. But what I love more is that before they were this right behind me, before they were these people over here working and stuff, they're humans, and they're sons and daughters and brothers and sisters, just like anybody else in any occupation. So what we did with the Fatal 10 is we said, listen, this is bigger. This is bigger than law enforcement. That's a segment of the population that we know very, very well. But we can take this anywhere. We started now looking into construction workers. And as you said, Joseph, we have to tailor how we take those things to them and what they expect from us and how we present it. We look at, construction workers are second leading, highest in suicide rates now, right behind mining when we look at the numbers. So we had to take, a look at that. We looked at, okay, how do we present this to a different population? What do we need to do differently than we did in law enforcement? We're looking at physicians and nurses. We're looking at veterinarians and members of the clergy that also have high suicide rates. But we're looking for things that are going to change big picture and change a collective, if you will. Like we can't take this and go small picture. What can we do? Person. How can we fix each of these cases? What we need is an answer that's going to look at this in a big picture way, meaning how do we get nationwide numbers down? Because we're all still a part of those numbers. Regardless of what we track, the national number is 49,000 plus right now, and it climbs, every day. How do we get that number down? Because those people all matter. They all work somewhere. They all have, occupations. They all have families. They all have issues. How do we tailor this fatal 10 not only to other occupations but to the human condition itself? And then the inoculation paradigm that we're talking about is getting to people to get them these coping mechanisms that they need before crisis, things that they do before they get into crisis. I said, even having the National Suicide Hotline, we wait for people to be in crisis and then we expect to fix it. Why are we not getting to people so that they don't get into crisis in the first place? And that's where the mindset needs to be when we have this funding that comes out. We need to stop throwing millions of dollars into billboards and pamphlets and things. We need to get into agencies and into schools and into universities where we see these problems that exist, and they have for quite some time, and we need to change the way people think. We say we got to think differently. We have to let them think differently and to see their circumstances differently. And they have to understand that, yes, there are going to be times when we're going to have officers that are not going to be in the field anymore. They might get terminated. They might face jail time for what they're doing. We have people that may lose a lot, but we should not be losing lives over this, because we have to teach them how to think differently, how to be resilient, and how to come back from circumstances, even those circumstances for which they put themselves into. There may be a reason behind how they got there. We help them get through that. And we try to look at different ways that they can now become resilient and they can do things differently moving forward.
I got to tell you, when I first read The Fatal 10, I got goosebumps. And I could not agree with you more that it needs to cut across all industries. As a consultant, I respond to corporations when there's been a shooting, or when there's been a suicide in the workforce. I respond to public school systems. And I've also spent a little time as a K-12 school counselor in the middle and high schools. And when I look at the Fatal 10, those things were in place. In the corporate environment, those things were in place. In the school system, the sad part about post-incident response is you start to actually get the truth. Nobody knows what to say or what to do or how to react if somebody is off base. He made me feel uncomfortable. She was struggling. But after the fatality, I hear the same thing all the time. He wasn't sleeping. He's been doing drugs the last 18 months. He's been hearing voices. I'm like, did you tell anybody? Did you tell anybody? And the answer is absolutely not. So I realize there's a big missing educational component here that we've got to go ahead. As I tell them, you don't have to be a therapist. You have to pass that information on to people who can help. And I try to educate my mid-level managers. Look, when you do get this information, please go ahead and start to communicate with some of your other community leaders in that school, in that workforce, so we don't have a shooting or we don't have a suicide in the parking lot. People, as a rule, when their gut goes off, they can't give it the analytical descriptors you and I can and have the psychological background to really look at what they're seeing, but they know something's wrong. And they knew something was wrong, or I wouldn't have so many people wanting to speak to me after that critical incident about, I didn't know what to do about it. He was packing a firearm in his backpack. I didn't know what to do about it. Mom and Dad got divorced. I didn't know what to do about it. There was a toxic workplace situation, on and on and on. And your work is revolutionary. It's changing the paradigm. The Fatal 10 is not just something that works in a first responder community. You really are addressing it on a much more global scale. And that's when I realized I became frustrated, because I'm like, what does she mean there's no epidemic? There's an epidemic. Oh, wait a minute. Why are you upset? What does the research say? Follow the research. So I'm capable of taking my own medicine. I'm capable of sitting here and reassessing things. I'm capable of looking at things and realizing, okay, more data has come out. What is science? Science is something that changes upon more data being given to us. And unfortunately, when it comes to suicidality, and one of the things you said earlier that I loved is if it was a drug overdose or something else, it might not have even been categorized as a suicide. So we're not even doing a good job at categorizations. And after incidents, I beg them to please, when legitimate investigative agencies, you guys, Jeff Dill's group at the Behavioral Health Alliance, are trying to collect data. If it's a legitimate agency, would you give them the data? We're never going to change anything if you guys don't participate. And as you said, sometimes that participation means some unfortunate things have to be said. Our member was engaged in substance abuse for a long time. I had a suicide about a year ago, and 4 people called me. I tried to call that individual into my office. He refused services completely. Our peer support team did not have a mandate that you will upscale it, so they kept the members' privacy. So I wasn't informed until after the suicide had been completed, only to find out that the local police chief had given him $1,000 so that he could go ahead and bootstrap himself and get himself back on his feet. And back on his feet meant that he was doing cocaine in hotel rooms and furthered. So basically, an agency actually contributed to the guy's death, refused. And when I got in the chief's office, I'm like, would you mind telling me why, with all the work we've tried to do here, why you couldn't call my ass? Why? And it's like, well, because he didn't want to speak to you. Because there's I'm like, yeah, he didn't want to speak to me because one of the conversations might be, it's time to transition out and find a new career. It's time to go to the IAFF Center for Excellence and get substance abuse treatment. And now we're at a funeral. So there's just so much denial and so much we don't know what to do. And when I looked at your work, I realized you're doing everything in your power to go ahead and educate us as to what to do, how to do it better. And it cuts across all disciplines. So that's another thing that's so important for us to articulate here today. And then I wanted to go ahead and articulate something else I saw on your social media feed. Someone dared accuse you of being a little bit too controversial. And to that I say, welcome to the club. But tell me what it's like to be a little too controversial.
Well, I was kind of surprised when I actually heard it. I heard it through a third party, and I got to be honest. I follow the rules. I'm very conscientious. So when I heard that, I really took a kind of a hit, thinking, what did I do? What did I say? I back everything up with data and research. But the more I really sat with it, I thought, we need something that's going to strike a nerve, I guess. So maybe I am. And I started getting phone calls from people, quite a few across the country, many trainers, friends, emails, text messages saying, hey, like you just said, welcome to the club. Many of them saying, I've been, the target of this for quite a while now. And it means that we're doing something different. And I'm okay with that. And I kind of sat with that for a little bit. I don't like uncomfortable. I don't like to cause issues, but I also don't think it's necessary that we have to back down from things either. So I'm very passionate about what I do. And I wouldn't be fighting this hard, Joseph, if what we were doing right now was working. And I think the fact that I've actually had people from large organizations talk about, spending more time worrying about getting our officers listed on the memorial wall. When you tell me that you've spent 30 years trying to get someone on the wall, when we're talking about suicide deaths, I sit here thinking I've spent the last 15 years trying to keep names off the wall altogether. What's our really agenda here? What's the real agenda here that we're running? And I just sat with it for a minute. And I said, no, these men and women deserve better than what they're getting. I'm tired of telling families one more time, I'm sorry for your loss. It does nothing. We can do something about this, but what we have to do is we have to stop giving our officers, our first responders, excuses for their behavior and their choices. We need to do something different, and it requires personal accountability. It requires agency accountability, and it requires all of us coming together and holding people accountable for their behaviors and their choices. And if we don't do that, we are going to literally give them one more excuse and one more foot in the grave, and that's literally what we're doing right now. So at some point we have to say either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And if you know that we have a problem and you choose to do nothing at this point, then I have to wonder, do you really want to fix this issue? And that's kind of where we're at right now. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. So many people give lip service to change, but they're not actually willing to go ahead and face the things that are required to make change happen. I want to go ahead and help people to find you and find your work. So if somebody wants you to consult, if somebody wants to go ahead and take advantage of your programs, let me see if we can go ahead and get your website up here. Tell us a little bit more about your website and what you're offering and what kind of services you're providing.
Sure. Thank you, Joseph. So we actually do consulting. We do needs assessment work. I train across the country. I do a little bit of everything. I write, I speak. I love my speaking stuff because that's really where my passion comes out. But yeah, we do all kinds of consulting work. In fact, we've consulted with quite a few construction places. I'm actually speaking next month for a construction company. Because of our work, they actually saw the fatal 10 of law enforcement and said, man, there's so many similarities. So we get people from all over, looking at our fatal 10, realizing that this isn't rocket science. Like, this is common sense, and if applied appropriately, this can really cover any, literally any genre and any occupation, and we can tweak it to that. So we consult with them. We bring in the fatal 10. We walk them through how we get here. We look at the issues that they're facing in their agencies, the struggles that they might have right now, and how we can help them, because we want to partner with these agencies. Everyone's struggling, not just your line officers. Your administrators are struggling too. They're human, and we see enough of them in our populations as well. And they take the heat for everything. And the difference is, where an officer can go online and maybe say something or speak up, your administrator can't go online and say anything to defend themselves. They're kind of stuck with that narrative. So we need to remember too that our administrators are humans and they have families too. And we've got to all kind of step back from this and go, hey, maybe they didn't make the best choice, but you know what? That choice isn't on you every day as a line officer. It's on your chief or your sheriff or whoever's in that position. And we have to give them a little bit of a break too, because we all have breaking points. And I think it really takes that idea of that empathy and that emotional intelligence part of us to we need to activate that a little bit more in our people to help them understand that as humans, we're going to make mistakes. But it's bigger when you can admit your mistakes and that you may have done something that you didn't like or you didn't do right or you'll do different next time. That's what learning is all about. I've learned some of my lessons in life, some of the hardest ones, because I'm a slow learner. I'm a type A. I'm a Taurus. I got a lot of stuff working against me here. But I realize that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to not please everybody. And we're not here to please everybody. We're here to do a job. And I think, along the way, we've kind of lost ourselves. And we're going to help you find that through the Blue Wall. We'll come in, we'll do a needs assessment. We'll get a baseline on your agency. Where are you at? How well are you? What do you need to see? And what we do is we take that fatal 10, we do a needs assessment, we get a baseline on the agency, and we take the top 3 or 4 things from that fatal 10, and we say, this is the things that you need right now. Within the next 2 weeks, no questions. We need everyone from your agency cycled through. We will come back and do the rest of those, but right now you need this. It's like we need the tourniquet right now, not the Band-Aid. And we're at that point. We've got to do something dramatic right now, or we're going to see a really big problem that we didn't expect.
Absolutely. Now, what is your URL? Is it bluewallinstitute.com?
It's bw-institute.com.
BW.
But you can Google search it and it'll pop up. It's a little more difficult.
Excellent. No worries there. And as we start to wrap up today, you and I know there are so many members in first responder organizations that are struggling. What message do you have for them to help them moving forward, to get help, or to work through the process that we both are trying to go ahead and alleviate first responder suicidality? So
yeah, I think one of the biggest things I want to tell people is this. Listen, maybe you've done something or something in your life isn't working right now, and you're kind of sitting there not knowing, what's going to happen. You're scared. You're concerned the relationship might come to an end. You could lose your job. Whatever that issue is that you're dealing with right now, it is not the end of the world. You can find me online. I do confidential peer support. I have other people that I can refer you to. Joseph's here. I mean, there's all kinds of organizations we can get you to. But I will tell you hands down right now that problem that you're dealing with, we can help you work through that. We can help you understand how you got here, how to not get here again, and we can work you through that. We don't make any guarantees that the relationship's going to be saved or your job's going to be saved, but I'm going to tell you right now, the choice is yours whether you stay here or not. And we know that we need you here. Your family needs you here. And these problems, I've had many problems in my life. I can look back now and I tell what I think is my younger self and go, man, if you'd only known that all that shit that you dealt with was all small shit, you wouldn't even sweat it now. And that's kind of where I'm at now as I go, put it in perspective here for a minute. Take a deep breath, step back for a moment, just let this be for 5 seconds and just take a minute to breathe and just sit here and know that it's going to be okay. You just need a support system right now that's going to help walk you through it. And we are those people. And if we don't have the answers for you or the help for you, we can find someone that does.
Beautiful. You are the very definition of post-growth. How long were you in law enforcement?
So let's see, five years law enforcement, 8 years military.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
As they say, you've seen some things. And you've dedicated your life's purpose to something amazing. And I can't thank you enough for being gracious enough to take time out of your day to let us speak with you, learn more about your programs. So the Blue Wall Institute, Dr. Olivia Johnson, get a hold of them and do what you can to make your institution and your agency a better place. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for being on our show, and we look forward to bugging you in the future to try to get you on season 3 if you have the time for us. So thank you.
I appreciate that. No, I thank you for having us. Thank you very much, Joseph.
I'm Joseph Brigandi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of ENROUTE. ENROUTE is a production of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. To learn more about us, head on over to